Hey, my name is Jeff Kelbe, and I'm owner-operator of Ashby Gap Adventures. It's a business that my wife and I started in 2019 and based out of Boyce, Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley. And we're in Harpers Ferry today, West Virginia. We're actually on the Potomac River in Maryland. Harpers Ferry is upstream, and Piedmont of Virginia is behind us, and Washington, D.C. is downriver about 70 miles. My wife and I started this business last year, running what we consider recreational tours on the river, or a form of ecotourism, historical tours, and just plain fun and relaxation. We're not a whitewater rafting business, but we are a rafting business. We take people on recreational rafting tours on the Shenandoah, the Potomac, the Rappahannock, the New River, at least those four rivers right now. This is my third river business. My first river business was a fishing guide service called Plain Cookie Outfitters, or Plain Cookie Guide Service, which was mainly just me taking people fishing and a few guides that worked with in the Harpers Ferry area and on the Shenandoah. And I guided from 1999 to 2007, and my wife and I ran a bed and breakfast in Boyce. And then we had a series of fish health issues and fish kills on the Shenandoah that wiped out the fishery that I'd been relying on to make a living, the smallmouth bass fishery. And rather than leaving the river system, which is what we considered doing, I got an opportunity to start a nonprofit called Shenandoah River Keeper, and that was my second river business, although it was a nonprofit business. And I spent the next, what turned out to be 14 years, working on pollution issues, trying to make the Shenandoah and Potomac rivers as clean as I could for recreational use. I poured my heart into that work for a decade and a half. When I left my guide service and started that, I thought I might do it for 5 years. But I found that the issues and the issues that the river was facing were more complicated than could be solved in 5 years. And I felt like after 14 years, I had worked my way through the ideas that I had related to improving agricultural practices with landowners and helping the industrial manufacturing facilities improve their treatment and watch the sewer treatment plants all upgrade their systems. And I watched the Shenandoah underneath me get cleaner over the course of 14 years. And then I felt like it was time for me to get back into the outfitting business and the river business. And so we started Ashby Gap because I've noticed that over the last 20 years, people have gotten really busy. They've gotten more busy than they ever were. They don't have the time to put together trips with their family. And they don't often have the gear. And it can be a lot of work kind of arranging a trip. And there's a lot of unknowns. People have become less certain about how to use the rivers, I've noticed. And I felt like there was an opportunity to help people to come out and enjoy this. It's one of the most amazing places in the world. Our river system here, the Potomac and Shenandoah, are unparalleled. There's no river system that's prettier. I put it on par with anything out there. Our rivers are wild. They're beautiful, and most of the year they're safe and clean to recreate in. And so we decided to start a business that modified my original boat frame. So when I was a fishing guide, I always guided out of rafts. I always used Moravia because Moravia are the lightest and most durable boats, and I needed a really light boat to be able to get my boat in and out in really difficult places, pushing it off of cliffs, into Great Falls, dragging it up clay banks in the Rappahannock, getting it out of what are unimproved access sites. And so I kind of narrowed in on a really simple boat frame design for my fishing guide service, but it only held 2 people. And when I started Ashby Gap Adventures, I wanted to be able to have larger groups, to have families, and most families are between 3 and 6 people. And so I was really determined to come up with a system where we could still row the boat and be quiet, which was really important to me. I wanted to have a system where we could take our customers on the river and not have motors in the background, not have loud gas motors burning, and we could row them. But I wanted everybody to be in a social configuration, and so I worked with John Hayes, who's a fellow guy who actually taught me to row back in the 90s, and we worked on a number of different frame designs, and we narrowed it down to a frame design where we have a 15.5-foot Moravia boat. We have the Moravia Zephyr, which is an amazing boat. It rows like a Ferrari. And we can put 6 people in and have up to 2,000 pounds of people in this boat and still row just with one person rowing. Can control this boat in white water, fast water, and shallow water. It's amazing. And so we came up with this raft frame configuration that we set up on top of the Moravia. It's an NRS system, and me and John designed it so that it has 6 seats that are together in a rectangular configuration. Everybody's sitting together in the front 2/3 of the boat, and I'm in the back third rowing. My guests are outside of the movement of my oars, so they're safe from getting knocked in the head by my oar rowing. And yet they could all enjoy the river sights, watch the wildlife, look down into the water, enjoy the mountains, all together, sitting together with their feet inside the boat on padded swivel seats. And that was my goal, was to have 6 people that could sit in their own seat, they could swivel around, they could look at the sights in 360 degrees, they could stick their feet in the water, or they could come in and we could set up a little table and they could have a snack or lunch in the middle, or enjoy an adult beverage, if you will, if they were an adult group. And so far it's been successful. We were really uncertain about what the demand would be for this service, but I felt like, because of the factors that I described before, I felt like as time went on, there's a lot of families and people that didn't mind somebody doing a little bit of the work and kind of doing the logistics of the trip and not having to worry about it. And they just get to show up, and we take them out. We feed them a gourmet lunch from the Lock Store in the Lock Store in Millwood, Virginia, which is right near our house. They make gourmet sandwiches, and people come out and have a really sweet time. And they come out. Most people are interested in about a 2 or 3 hour, sometimes 4-hour trip, and then so it's about a half a day. And then they can go about and either go up to the brewery if we're near a brewery, they can go into town and check out the sites in the historical towns in the area, or go back home, or go back to wherever they're staying. We were lucky this year to link up with the Salamander Resort in Middleburg, Virginia. It's a tremendously beautiful resort in the Piedmont of Virginia, outside of the town of Middleburg, an old historic town. They have a beautiful property, and they're offering equestrian services and falconry and swimming and fishing. They've got pools. Anyway, it's a really beautiful resort, and they asked me if I could provide individualistic service to their guests, and that's what we do. We provide trips for guests that are staying at Salamander, that are close to Salamander, and that are just a nice sampling of the rivers that we have in the area. So they can take half their day and not be away from the resort for very long, because everybody that's staying at Salamander wants to go back. But they can come out for a few hours and go back in a half a day and enjoy our sites. And we just had the nicest guests from the resort. And as a startup business, it's been a great relationship where we can take care of each group one by one with our business model, which is taking one group at a time. And we can do a little bit of work for the guests there and provide them an outdoor experience on the rivers. And so I'd say probably 50% of our guests are families. And what has been really interesting is that I think that we have a relatively unique ability to service what I consider like 3 generations of family, multi-generational families. So we've had more trips where we have grandparents arranging trips for their kids and their grandkids. And the way we have our boat configured, people who are aging, who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s, can still be comfortable and don't have to sit on a tube and stick their boat in the side and be in a contorted configuration. Don't have to paddle. Our guides row for them. And so it's been a way where we can mix multiple generations, and we can still have enough for people to do. Like the kids can swim, they can look for bugs and play with turtles, and the grandparents can just enjoy the time, and the parents can be involved with their kids. That's one of the things that we didn't anticipate, that people have told us is a really sweet part about our service, is the 3-generation floats. And mostly we're having grandparents arrange those trips, or parents who, and sometimes parents have children and they have their grandparents coming to visit, and they'll take the opportunity to get everybody out, and they feel comfortable and safe bringing their parents or older parents on this boat. We're also offering overnight trips on the river, and we're outfitting all of the camping gear and the river, the floating part. Our guides will take you down the river, and we have islands that we camp on that we found that are public. or some private camping opportunities as well. And we do the tents and we do the cots, so the camping is comfortable. And we bring gourmet food and we prepare food over a campfire or over a grill riverside. That's becoming very popular too. We're getting a lot of requests. In fact, it's been kind of hard for us to keep up with the demand for our camping trips. So we like to row our boats. And we like to row them because it's quiet. And the places that we are taking people are really pretty. And there's nothing that ruins it more than a motor, a gas motor puttering along in the background. And through the years, we've narrowed down the gear. And we're all gearheads because we do this every day. And when something comes along that stands out, we like to grab it. And so when the Moravia boats, when I started the business, the first thing we started to use were the Moravia boats, which are, like I said, are light, and they have a urethane bottom, and they slide over rocks. And when you have 1,000 to 2,000 people in the boat, and you're the only person that's rowing them, how shallow that boat runs and how slippery it is to go over rocks is really important. And then the next thing is the oars themselves. And just this year, our typical oar was a steel sleeved oar with a plastic coating with a counterweight on them, because the oars are very heavy, and a counterweight helps, as a typical oar will be very heavy outside the oar lock, and it wants to lift up like this, and you're constantly pushing it down. And when you're pushing it down 6 or 8 hours a day, you end up with rotator cuff damage, and it hurts, or just pain, and it's very physical. And last year, my friend Duncan McGrath, who guides on the New River, said, "I've got a new oar, you have to check it out." And I was skeptical, I didn't think much about it. And Robert C., who's the representative for Moravia and for Sawyer Oars, lent one out to me. And I picked this composite oar up, and it's about 3 pounds. And the oars I was using before were closer to 12 or 15 pounds. And my first thought is that if I sharpened the end, I could probably spear a squirrel with it, and I could get my dinner with it. It's so light, I could use it as a spear. It's literally almost weighs nothing. And not only that, it's the Sawyer Smoker oar, or the Smoker. I'm sorry, it's the Sawyer Smoker Bandit oar. Here's the sign here, made in America. Very cool. It's got an ash grip that ends about here, and then the rest of it's composite. It's rope raft. And not only is it light, but the composite, it's perfectly balanced. It just, when I let go of it, it just rests right where I let go of it. This is where I row. It's amazing. And not only that, but when you pull on it, the composite flexes like a pole vault pole, or like a fishing fly rod or a fishing rod. And it flexes and stores energy. And at the end of your stroke, it pops. And so I can row this thing with very little effort and very little wear on my joints. And these oars just propel the boat. And so, like I said, this thing rows like a Ferrari, even when I've got 1,500 pounds of people in it. I can surf in waves, I can ferry across rapids, and I can paddle in shallow water. And so this configuration together with the NRS frame and the Sawyer Smoker Bandit oars is just wicked. It's really wicked. And it's expensive. All this gear is the top end of the gear, but these things last. My first Moravia I bought in 2000. I'm sorry, first Moravia I bought in 2001, and it's still in commercial use. And these oars I'm going to use forever. This frame's going to last forever. The cherry on top of the ice cream is, unfortunately, this new discovery, which is going to cost me a lot of money again, because now I've got 5 rafts, and I'm going to need to get one of these Torqeedo engines for all of them. My friend Jeff Little, who represents Torqeedo, was nice enough to loan this motor to me to use for my rafting trips, and I've been running it at Harper's Ferry in the Shenandoah. And the minute I picked that thing up and felt how light it was, and I've got this self-contained lithium-ion battery motor that's got 4 horsepower, and I don't have to deal with gas anymore, and ethanol problems, and all the hassles of small engines, overheating, picking up grass, smelling, making noise. I was like, I wish you hadn't given it to me, honestly. But we've been out here banging it around on the river and tinkering with how it's mounted. I at first thought I really needed to mount it directly in the center of the back, but I don't. I've got this side mount here. It's out of the way. and it drives this boat like I didn't even know. You don't even know that it's off to the side, but it's a perfect spot. I can stay in my seat. I don't have to move. I just reach over, I put this puppy in the water, and I turn it on, and the guests don't even know I'm running a motor. And all of a sudden, we're running up riffles and running up fast water, and they're looking back, like, how are we doing this? And this boat's sailing up through this fast water, and we're getting in the base of rapids and playing around, and kids are out climbing rocks, and it's just been awesome. And my math on it was, I'm looking at the gauges. I've gotten a little bit familiar with the gauges on here. In this boat, with a full boat of guests, I'm able to run this entire unit at almost 4 miles an hour for close to 20 miles. And so, and I don't run trips that are more than 10 miles. So I could run my whole day on this thing, and I could probably run 2 trips on it. It's quiet, it's got tremendous torque, and we banged it around. Jeff suggested that I, quote, try to break it, and we banged it over the rocks. It's got this amazing rock guard on it. I don't know if you can see it, but it's got this fork configuration, and that simple little rock guard protects that plastic propeller from the rocks. And it bangs around occasionally when you hit a rock, but it bounces, the motor just pops up, and it goes back down, and it keeps on turning. So this rock guard was designed by innovative sportsmen, and I hope he sells 1 million of them. It's amazing. It really is. Together with this thing, it's made what would be a great motor for a sailboat, a great motor for a raft in a rocky river. Because I don't have to worry about it. I can run down the river, and if I misread the river, or I see a rock, or don't see a rock, and I bang on it with the motor, it just pops up and it keeps on going, digs back in, and on we go. So when I was riverkeeper for 14 years, involved with the Potomac River Keeper Network and Shenandoah Riverkeeper, I would be asked every day, is the river safe? And I think it's because they read things about the rivers that are, that accentuate the bad things that can happen on a river, or sometimes they accentuate the pollution issues that exist on all rivers in the U.S. and really almost any river in the world. And it's just like any press. Sometimes bad press gets, is more scintillating. But the reality is, if you look at this river, 11 months out of 12, it's got beautiful clarity. Most of the time up here, our bacteria levels are low enough to swim in it. We don't drink the river, but you don't really drink any water that's untreated anywhere. Even spring waters in the top of the mountain have animals that live in them and that can create issues. So I'm not recommending that people drink it, but I get in it every day. And I just want people to know that our rivers are gorgeous. They're wild. People that live in Washington, D.C. have absolutely no idea how wild and beautiful the Potomac is and how well it's been preserved. When I ran a fishing guide service, I kind of forgot how much fun it is just to come out here and hack around and play around in the water and look at the sights. And I've been really geeking out on sort of deepening my understanding of the history. For 15 years, I worked on the river ecology and the environment, and I really neglected the history, although I picked little bits up here and there. I've been enjoying learning about that as well, either the history of the river and commerce, which was the only transportation route for the goods and services that were produced in the upper Shenandoah and Potomac since the kings granted this land to the colonists. And it was the only source of transportation until the canal was built and the railroads were built in the 1850s and 1860s. And then they took over largely, and the river became obsolete as the transportation route. But before that, the colonists relied on it, and the Native American population before them. And so the river has a deep history here, 10,000 years of being the transportation route, and the route that all the goods and services were moved, from town to town, or from village to village. And it's also been a source of subsistence for a lot of people as well. And to some degree, it's still a form of subsistence. A lot of people's subsistence fish on the river, and that's not well known. So, and the other question that I always struggled with when people asked, what can they do? I think people have a pretty good sense for how to be a good citizen now. I think the secret's out. People know how to be a caring and responsible citizen that doesn't pollute your waterways. A lot of that involves not putting things down the drain that you wouldn't drink. It involves, if you run businesses, being as responsible as possible with your businesses and how your environmental impact of your business. on the rivers and on the land. And agricultural practices have done nothing but improve their practices over the last 30 years in terms of how the agricultural fits into the valleys where they operate, and how they've done tremendous work and invest a lot of money and time in reducing soil loss and nutrient use on their land, which benefits them economically, but also benefits the river. And I think we've spent, since the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972, which is now almost 50 years old, we spent 50 years making up for the transgressions of past generations that either didn't know or didn't understand the impacts they were having on our river. And I think citizens have woken up too and understand how to be good citizens. And I always recommend people join and contribute to their local nonprofits that are doing conservation work and environmental work. That's one of the best things that citizens can do, because those organizations spend their days, and they're professionals, and they know exactly how, where the levers of government are, where the levers are in regulation, where the levers are in terms of how to keep our rivers clean, keep pollution from getting into our waterways. So always join your local group. And that's not a direct shout out, but it's nearly a direct shout out for groups like Potomac River Keeper Network and Shenandoah River Keeper, Potomac Conservancy, Anacostia Watershed Society, Anacostia River Keeper. These are great groups that plot all day long how to keep our rivers clean for the river users and for the public. Pretty awesome. Best way to find us is through a Google search. Our website is www.ashbygap.com or ashbygapadventures.com. We're also on Facebook. We have an Instagram, and I think maybe really only our friends follow us. It's really sweet of them, and they're always liking our pictures. But I'm finding that there's a little bit of a growing following there. People that enjoy pictures of the historic assets along the river, or fun things that we encounter with, because we're out here all day, and wildlife is being wildlife, whether you're there or not. And so we encounter some really cool things happening. In fact, on that rock outcropping right behind us the other day, there were two eagles fighting over a dead carp. And they kind of pulled it apart, and the guts were flying all over the place, and flesh was flying, and they were squabbling, and then one of them took off, and we came down and through, and the other one was, having his fill of this pretty disgusting bloated dead carp. But they were absolutely beautiful, and unless you got really close, you didn't know the carp was bloating and disgusting. But it was cool. Like this fight unfolded in front of us, and that's what you get when you get out here. If you spend a little time, you're likely to get rewarded with something cool that wildlife is doing, despite your presence. And the quieter you are out here, unless you fool around with, motors and noise, and the more that happens. And, I don't want this to be an advertisement for Torqeedo, but why not? It's such a cool product and cool motor, and I'm really looking forward to having it and being able to get to more places and having the wildlife not know about it. That's okay with me.